So we've been talking a lot about the Radical Greens abortion bill that's being led by someone called Amanda Conn, who is an abortionist from regional New South Wales. She has talked a lot in this campaign about disinformation. Well, today we're going to have a look at her research and what she says is good research. And I think you're going to be as shocked as I am at what we find. And that's today on The Dr. Joe Show. So before we get started, can I please ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already? The more people that subscribe, and our base is growing so much, I'm really thrilled about this, but the more people that subscribe, the bigger it grows and the more people we reach. Today we're going to be talking about Amanda Conn. Now, she is someone that describes being an abortionist as an experience of joy and empowerment, and her stated reason for being in the parliament, for going into politics, is about abortion. Now, I think she genuinely believes what she's saying, that abortion is pro-women. But time and time again in this debate, when people like myself have come out and said, this is what your bill actually does. So right on March 19, when I raised the alarm on social media and said, this is a bill that will destroy religious freedom because it will potentially force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions and force doctors to be involved in abortions, she straight away got onto my social media. I don't think she really knew who I was. So she just jumped on straight away and said, this is misinformation. And when I called her on it and said, this is your provision in your bill, in Schedule 1, it says that a hospital must comply. That clearly indicates that they're going to have to perform abortions. Please explain why you think it's misinformation. She deleted her comments, and I literally never heard from her again, despite the fact that I've wanted to debate her. The briefing, which is a lefty program. So really she should have been happy that they were going to moderate. They asked her, will you go for a debate? We'll have you and Dr. Howe on at the same time. She refused. She just refuses to actually engage with me because I think she just knows that what I'm saying is true. I think so. I don't know why else she would be so afraid. And in fact, on her social media celebrating the bill's passage through the upper house, I started responding to some comments on Sunday because I've been doing research for today's show, and I could see that there were some comments that I really wanted to respond to. She immediately, or in a short while after that started to happen, she just removed comments from that post altogether. She didn't want anybody to see me saying what I had to say on her page, responding and bringing out the data. So the good news is she can't cancel our YouTube channel, and she doesn't have that much power yet. And so we're going to today talk about a research paper that she did on chemical abortions, on abortion pills. And you're going to be totally blown away by the stuff that we're going to talk about because it is genuinely shocking. It's genuinely mind-boggling to think about the dodgy research that's being done to prop up the case for abortion that she's now prosecuting in the parliament. So I'll get this for you straight. Let's get it straight. So she's a abortionist in rural New South Wales, and she's giving out abortion drugs. She's killing babies. That's what she's doing for a day job. She then thinks, well, I could be achieving this en masse. Let me go into the parliament. She goes into the parliament and introduces a bill that will allow what she's doing in regional New South Wales to be writ large across New South Wales, which then provides a template for the entire nation. So, this is really dangerous stuff, and it's all underpinned by dodgy research that she and other pro-abortion scholars have done that they get it through the peer review process. And I want to be really clear with you because I think people get genuinely confused. They go, oh, well, it's in an academic journal article. It must be reputable. It's peer reviewed. Now, you guys know I'm a professor of law. I've been doing this for a very long time. The peer review process doesn't mean anything when it comes to politically motivated areas of research. I mean, I would say it probably doesn't mean anything very much, full stop, because the reality is if you are writing according to the orthodoxy of the academy. So you're a pro-abortion scholar talking about how RU486, MS2-step, chemical abortion pills, whatever you want to call them, they are good and they're in the interest of women. If you're writing from that perspective, all the journal does is send your paper to two other scholars who then write anonymous reports about your article. But if everybody in the academy, or 99.9%, are pro-abortion, and that is the case in our universities, that it's virtually impossible to exist as a pro-life academic. I mean, look at what's happening to me. I'm literally under investigation constantly. I had to take my own university to the Fair Work Commission just to even keep my job because they were bullying me so much. And so the peer review process simply means that I've written a pro-abortion paper. The journal's now sending it out to two pro-abortion scholars who are going to sign off on it. I kind of know this firsthand because my entire academic career, I was writing according to the orthodoxy of the academy. I was writing about justice for working people, vulnerable temporary migrants, and exploitation. I never had a problem getting published. I was prolifically published. I have won Australian Research Council grants. I've published more than pretty much anyone in my field during a certain period there. I was just publishing prolifically. No problem getting through peer review because I was publishing according to the orthodoxy. The first time I came against this was when I tried to publish around conscientious objection for doctors. I did a co-authored article with Professor Suzanne Lemire, and because we were critiquing whether doctors should have to refer for abortion, we just could not get that published in Australia. Like, the peer review process was blocking us at every turn from every journal that we approached. And it was because it was going to pro-abortion scholars who just refused to allow this through because it deviated from the orthodoxy in the academy, which is pro-abortion. A colleague finally said to us, look, you're just going to have to publish it overseas. Like, there's a bit more respect for diversity of opinion. Just give it a try overseas. And we got it in straight away in the Cambridge Journal of Law. So, it's just insane, the level of kind of censorship within the academy. And so just because Amanda Cohn's journal article has got published, I want you to know that doesn't mean anything. And so let's look at her article. Let's take a deep dive. So you're going to have to stay with me because we are going to get a bit nerdy. But this is an article that she wrote called The Efficacy and Safety of Medical Termination of Pregnancy in a Regional Primary Care Setting. And her claim is that they studied 998 patients over a period of 6 years between 2014 and 2020. They all received a medical termination. So that's just another euphemism or way of describing a chemical abortion, or through the drug RU486 or mifepristone or MS2-step, because there's two pills that you take, mifepristone and misoprostol. So these are just all ways of describing the same thing. It's an abortion by pills in the first trimester. So there were 998 patients, and she says that this drug has high efficacy and safety because it was successful in 96.7% of patients, and in only 3.6%, there were complications of an incomplete termination, and there were cases of hemorrhage requiring transfusion. It was rare, having a frequency of 1, and she said the follow-up rate was 74.8%. So the big headline for her is medical terminations are safe and effective. This was a nurse-led study, and that's the whole point of her bill. So she's saying in Albury-Wodonga, nurses were leading the giving out of these abortion drugs, and they were safe and they were efficient. Now she's in Parliament and she's trying to do the same thing, roll this out statewide, turning nurses into abortionists. So that's what she says is the findings of her study. Let's drill down to what actually has happened if you read between the lines. So in her study of 998 women who had chemical abortions in Albury-Wodonga, they actually excluded a whole range of people from the study. Let's take a look. So it was a retrospective quantitative analysis. So it wasn't everybody that had had a medical abortion between 2014 to 2020 in this location. She actually excluded from the study anybody that had a high risk factor. Let's take a look. So anyone that had a known or suspected ectopic pregnancy, long-term cortisosteroid therapy, anyone who had a mifepristone drug allergy, postpartum hemorrhage, untreated pelvic infection, intolerance to pain, low hemoglobin levels, and so on, even excluding people that live greater than 30 minutes away from a hospital that can perform an emergency D&C. Now, let's be clear. These weren't patients who were excluded from taking a chemical abortion. No, they still got to access the drug, but they were excluded from her study because they were high risk. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that they're trying to artificially create a low-risk group to obviously make it seem like abortion pills are safe and effective with less complications. Let's just take even one of the groups that were excluded, this group, which is anyone who was greater than 30 minutes travel time between the chemical abortion location and an emergency department. Now, Amanda Khan's bill wants you to be able to get an abortion pill because they're safe and effective, either via telehealth, which already exists, by the way, or just through a nurse in any location across New South Wales. And some of these locations are hours and hours away from a metropolitan hospital, which can perform an emergency D&C. Now, why is that important? Well, because if you take the abortion drug, you take it orally, what can happen is bits of the baby can be left inside, so retained products of conception. So bits of the baby or pregnancy tissue can be inside. They don't all get expelled. And then when that happens, you can get sepsis and an infection, and it can be life-threatening. In fact, Dr. Gino Porcaro, who is the head of the peak body of specialist OBGYNs, he has actually come out and said how dangerous it is for nurses and midwives to be giving these drugs because they're not trained to assess the risks and for the complications. And he talks about the fact that one night he was on shift and a woman who had taken one of these drugs in a regional location had to be airlifted by helicopter to his hospital and receive emergency D&C just to save her life. So the reality is women can die from these drugs. And, you know, all those stories in the US where The Guardian and Politico, all these left-wing publications are saying women are dying because of abortion bans. They're not dying because of abortion bans. They're dying because they're getting these pills in the mail. They're taking these dangerous chemical abortion pills. They've got retained products of conception. They're fronting up to a hospital. The hospital doesn't know what to do and they don't react quickly enough because often doctors aren't trained to deal with this, when in reality, if you've got a woman with retained products of conception, you need to do an emergency D&C as quick as you can because she literally could die. And we've seen that in the US. They're not dying because of abortion bans. They're dying because of medical malpractice to do with these pills that these women are taking. The women are told, oh, they're safe and effective because of studies like Amanda Khan's, when in reality, the complication rate is much higher. So she has excluded all of these risk groups from her study. And then she turns around and says, oh, but the complication rate is only 3.6%. And note in her study, she doesn't justify why they were excluded. She just says patients eligible for MTOP's prescription underwent all necessary investigations and did not meet any exclusion criteria for MTOP. So nothing to justify why they were excluded. This doesn't seem like normal academic practice to me, scholarly practice, where you exclude a group from your study and don't say why. I mean, it's clear to me why she's excluding them, as they're a riskier group. And the reality is the general population is a riskier group. The artificial sample size of 998 patients that she uses for her study, that's not the general population. You've just taken out all of the people who could potentially have an adverse reaction to these drugs or who can't access emergency care. So you've created an artificial group, and then you turn around and say, oh, and it's really safe and effective with only a complication rate of 3.6%. Now, even that's BS, as we're about to see. Now, not only is this part of the study misleading, but the other thing you'll note about the study is that this was a nurse-led model of giving out abortion drugs. And in the study, all patients had access to a 24-hour nurse-led hotline. Now, Amanda Khan's bill doesn't have anything like that in there. There's no provision or resources being given to that. And that's what you'll see often in these studies which talk about how safe and effective MS two-step is. On the one hand, they'll exclude everybody who's at risk, and then they'll put extra safety protocols on top to make sure that nothing bad happens or to respond quickly when it does. And none of that is mimicked in the real world when they roll out these drugs so that every woman can access it anywhere. And they throw caution completely to the wind when it comes to the safety of real life women, not in some artificial academic study. Now, this is where it gets really crazy, guys, and you're not going to believe it, is when she says there's a complication rate of 3.6%. So therefore these drugs are really safe and effective because it's just such a low rate of complications. What she's doing is cooking the data, because there were 998 women who took these medical abortion drugs. They're the group that she has artificially created for this study. She then says that only 36 of them had a complication. And she says the rate's so low, it's 3.6%. But if you read the fine print, what you'll notice is that it only had a retention rate of 74.8%. So over a quarter of the women in this study, the women that took the abortion pill, they were lost to follow-up. We have literally no idea what happened to them. Some of those women literally could have taken this pill and hemorrhaged out and died. Like, we just genuinely don't know. Some of them could have been fine. Some of them might have needed an emergency D&C. Like, we just don't know, because 74.8% is the amount of women that stuck around. So this is an extraordinarily high lost group. Like it's a huge amount of women to not know what happened to them. It should be a red flag to Amanda Conn, but because this is a propaganda piece aimed to support her work in abortion, she doesn't identify that. She just says, oh, that's normal. When even the largest abortion study prior to this, the Goldstone study that everybody quotes from 2017, that was a study that also was written by pro-abortion scholars to get more abortion and to talk about the safety of these drugs. Even in that study, the lost rate was 14%. So here you've got even a higher lost rate. Now she says, oh, maybe it's because of COVID. But even so, it doesn't really matter why it happened. It's the fact that it did happen. And get this, when she says there's a complication rate of 3.6%, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, that surely is then just 36 women out of the women that remained, about 746. That it would be fair to exclude the group that you just don't know what happened to. But that's not what she did. She cooked the book so much that her 3.6% rate is actually 36 divided by 998 times 100. Like, she's attached that number of 3.6% to the entire group of women who entered the study at the beginning, even though she doesn't know what happened to a quarter of those women. There's about 250 women there who Amanda Conn cannot tell you what happened to when they took these abortion drugs. And yet she's saying that the complication rate across 998 women for the entire study is 3.6%. It's just not true. It's literally not true. And I don't even know how it could get through a peer review process, but that is actually how she got that number. So let's look at what that number should actually be in her study where she's artificially created the healthiest group, lowest at-risk group of women she could find, because she's excluded all of the people that might have risk factors, even though the general population has those people in it and they're not excluded from taking this drug. So even within her extraordinarily artificial group of women in her box, in her controlled study, the rate of complication isn't 3.6%, it's actually 4.8%. And that's exactly how you calculate that number, because you can't include the women who you lost. You can't say that they didn't have a complication and so therefore they're part of this 3.6%. We don't know what happened to them. And so I shouldn't be having to tell Amanda Conn or anyone this. I shouldn't be having to tell this journal this or anyone who's peer reviewed it. The reality is, if you don't know what happened to the women, you can't include them in the rate of women who didn't have a complication, because you just don't know and you can't verify that empirically. And then finally, at the bottom of this article, it literally says, no authors of this paper have conflicts of interest to declare. And that's the point where you just go, this is a complete waste of time. It's a complete stitch up. And if this is the quality of the research underpinning this propaganda that abortion pills are safe and effective, well, gosh, it's just not worth a paper it's written on, because this research was conducted in Albury-Wodonga, where she's been working as an abortionist. Presumably she's the doctor signing off on these abortions. I don't know if that's true, but I can't imagine there's many abortionists in Albury-Wodonga. And even just the mere fact that she's an abortionist should be a conflict of interest, let alone the fact that she's probably the abortionist in town who's signing off on all of these chemical abortions. So, when we look at her rate of 3.6%, which doesn't even match up to the rate in the Goldstone study, which is 5.15%. They didn't do the exclusion that she did. They didn't cook the books as much as she did. They still did what Conn did, which is get a really non-at-risk group to artificially inflate the safety outcomes of these drugs. But even they, got 5.15%. She, in effect, found 4.8%. Not that that's what you see when you read the paper. But if you actually look at just a completely unbiased piece of data. So this is something that the South Australian government produces. It's the only government in the country that actually records, is there an adverse effect? Is there a consequence when a woman takes a chemical abortion pill in South Australia? Is there a recorded adverse event that is directly linked to the chemical abortion? They found in 2023 it was 6.6%. So they're not doing any exclusions. They're not saying, let's get rid of all the women who actually have health risks. This is probably the closest we're going to find to a unbiased piece of data that just is literally raw data. And what they found is that of all the women that killed their babies via chemical abortion, there was a complication rate of 6.6%. In contrast, for a surgical abortion, it was as low as 0.2% for one surgical abortion method and 0.4% for the other surgical abortion method. So when Amanda Conn tells us that abortion pills are safe and effective, and when Chris Minns and Labor says we're voting for nurses and midwives to give out these pills just like they're Panadols, what they're really doing is saying we don't care about the safety of women. If they're pro-abortion, all well and good, but at least care about the safety of women. One book I talk to you guys a lot about is this one, RU486, by pro-abortion scholars Renata Klein and Janice Redmond. And what they show is that, the pharmaceutical companies literally cooking the books around the trials for these drugs. They fast-track the approvals. The entire process to get them approved was extraordinarily dodgy. And at the time that they were approved, the World Health Organization was saying you need to have close medical supervision for these drugs because of how dangerous they are. And these authors point out to the fact that there's a sense of unreality about this doublespeak that on the one hand promotes RU486 as a simple pill that can be popped in the privacy of a woman's home, and on the other hand states quite clearly that it will never be given without strict medical supervision. Now, that was at the time when this book was written in 1991, and the second edition was published in 2013. So in the 1990s and early 2000s, all of the medical language was these pills need close medical supervision. But fast forward 20 years, and we're now in a situation where the World Health Organization has been captured by pro-abortion ideologues who say, just give out these pills. We don't need the close medical supervision. And you've got people like Amanda Conn and other pro-abortion scholars and researchers and politicians now saying you can just get these pills by telehealth, given out to you by a nurse, and there doesn't need to be any kind of supervision. And they're literally throwing women's safety down the river. It just shows you, exposes to you that their concern is not for women, it is for the abortion industry itself. And in fact, just to finish up, a new study that, again, like the South Australian data, this study in the US has just come out, and it's looked at over 800,000 women in the US, and it's taken data from an insurance claim. So women, when they take the abortion drug, they'll put in an insurance claim. And what it's done is triangulated the data to look at when has there been a serious adverse effect that's directly related to a chemical abortion. Now, there's some pro-abortion activists online who are saying that this study is cooked because it's by the Centre for Ethics and Public Policy, which is an organisation that is from a pro-life perspective. So similarly, with Amanda Conn writing that piece. But I do want to say, my issue with Amanda Conn writing that piece is not that she's an abortionist writing a piece that abortion pills are safe and effective. If her data and her actual methodology and findings had been sound, I don't think we would have a problem, because the reality is everybody's writing from a normative perspective. No scholar is neutral. The SA data is literally neutral and objective because it is just that. It's just raw data and you can make of it what you will, that it has a 6.6% complication rate. But any academic study or paper is going to come from a normative perspective. This one does too. This one coming out of the US, it's coming from a pro-life group. But what they have done is they've looked at 865,727 mifepristone abortions, and they found an adverse rate of 10.93%. They actually excluded 72% of emergency visits following the taking of a mifepristone abortion, and they only included ones that were clearly directly related to a chemical abortion. So their method probably has understated the amount of consequences that have occurred, and they found a 10.93 adverse effect rate. So, I think this is the largest scale we have of abortion pill usage and the effects, and it's finding a 1 in 10 adverse consequence, which is, similar to SA, which is saying, 6 to 7% adverse rate. And you might be saying, well, why is it higher in the US as opposed to SA? Well, it could be for the fact that in SA, typically, most women are not accessing the abortion pill by telehealth. They're going to either the Pregnancy Advisory Clinic, which is an abortion centre in South Australia, or they're going to their GP. And so they've got checks and balances and kind of risk factors identified before they take this drug. In the US now, you can get the pills by post, and that's been happening for a while. And obviously the health system in the US is not as well-funded or resourced as it is here. So it would make sense that if you've got a worse health system and more comorbidities or health risks, a less healthy population, you're probably going to have more adverse consequences. Now, I think all of this to say that we have to be really careful when we hear and see the headlines in the media or the things that politicians tell us that, oh, well, abortion drugs are really safe and effective because the TGA here has approved them or because the World Health Organization says they are. I think even if you don't believe me, everybody should be reading this book by the pro-abortion scholars who are clearly saying in this book, we support abortion. We just think that this is an incredibly unsafe, dangerous method of abortion. So thank you for joining me today. It is probably going to be a very sad day because this bill with this provision, turning nurses and midwives into abortionists and allowing these dangerous drugs to be given to women all across New South Wales, that's probably going to pass. And we're going to be regrouping and talking about where to from here in coming shows. But that's today on The Dr. Jo Show.